Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kaylee and today we are back on my island Rubble for another speed build video. Today we'll be building a graffiti bridge and this turned out to be a pretty big build, so make sure to grab a snack and get comfy and let's get right into it. Alright, so for this build I'm starting out making the edge of the bridge, and I use the word bridge lightly here. This is more of like the front of a wall or a cliff, but in my head it kind of looks like a bridge, so that's what I'm going to call it. To start this area I'm going in with a mix of simple panels and placing those alongside of the cliff. And for this, I used a mix of just concrete and concrete with graffiti because it gives that abandoned and trashy vibe that I'm looking for. And before we get too far into the video, this is the picture that inspired this build. And I was recently asked by someone where I get my inspiration from, and my biggest one is Pinterest. I like to use a mix of real life photography and either shots from video games or different types of art, but I also like to use Google to find these pictures. I also like to take inspiration from places I've been in real life. Obviously this island is post-apocalyptic, so I haven't really seen this in real life, but I like to take places I have been before and think about what they might look like if an apocalypse did happen. And I think using pictures, whether real life or types of art, is helpful when building in this game because it makes the build look a little bit more realistic and natural. Okay, back to the build. Now that the side of the cliff is covered with our simple panels, I'm going through and placing a line of ruined arches and the mossy variant in front of those. And this is what really makes the build start to look like an actual bridge rather than just a concrete wall. And then in front of the little gaps between the arches, I'm adding the ruined pillars, and I'm mixing it up between the full-length pillars and the broken ones. Now I'm working on the building that we'll use for our overlook. And I did mess around with this building in a few different versions because at first I wanted this to be a double lookout so you could see the bridge from the first level, and then you could also climb up to the second level and see the bridge from that angle as well. But I found that the second level was just blocking too much of the view, so I just made this a simple one-level building made up of retro transportation stops. So to make this building, you'll have a 2x4 block of terraforming and then place 7 of the retro transportation stops turned around alongside of the cliff. I did make sure to leave the middle of the back side open, that way I can place our vine there to let us climb on top of the building. To finish off the simple building, I'm covering the ground with a gray shutter code to make it look like the roof of the building rather than having the grass show. And then to block off the gap in the insides of the retro transportation stops, I'm adding a small line of fencing across the back wall. I decided to go with the gray corrugated iron fencing because it matches the building the best. To decorate the top of the building, I'm just adding a lawn chair and a cardboard box with a busted radio to make it look like people would come up here to hang out or see the bridge overlook. Just like our inspiration picture, I wanted to add a red brick building in the right corner. This is another really simple building, and to make this one I made a 2x7 block of terraforming and covered it with a red rusted coat, and then lined the terraform cliff with a mix of castle walls and medieval walls. Unlike our other building we just made, this one won't be accessible, so it's just to decorate this area. A lot of the buildings I've made so far on this island have been made out of either storefronts or retro transportation stops, so I wanted to mix this up a little bit and I thought this was the perfect opportunity to make a different type of building. I'm also planning on making a factory for this island, and I haven't made this build yet, but I do have a vision for it, and I'm planning on using castle and medieval walls to give it that brick look as well. Alright, on to our third and final big building for this area. This building is going to be slightly different because this one also has a decorated second cliff. So for this building, I first made a 4x4 block of terraforming and covered that with a concrete tile code. And then to make this building look like it has a second story, I made a mini building on top made out of 3 storefronts, 2 in the back facing each other and then 1 in the front facing outwards. I wanted this building to look like it was a rundown house, so I decorated the top with some clothing items to give it that homey vibe. To finish off this building, I used the same variant of storefront and covered all sides of the cliff. I was actually short by 2 storefronts, so just ignore the tiny gap in the back. Once I get 2 more storefronts, that spot will be covered up. Now I'm making our pathway from our stone staircase down to our overlook building. I usually cut this part out because I think it's a little boring to watch someone lay down pathing, but I figured I'd show my process on how I make realistic and natural pathways. I start by outlining where I want my path to go by placing a few tiles of my custom code in the general pattern I want to create. I then start to build around this pattern by adding a few areas where the pathway is a little thicker and some spots where the path is only a single tile wide. I think having paths in varying thickness help the natural look, since most dirt paths in real life aren't just a singular size. I also like to break the pathway up a little bit so it's not just one long stretch of pathway, because in real life we would still have some spots where grass or weeds would be popping through. Now I'm going to start decorating along the bridge and around the buildings. And if you've seen my other builds on this island, you probably noticed that when I decorate I don't leave a lot of open room. I basically decorate every tile, even if it's just a weed or a custom code. So my goal for this area is to actually leave some open spots of just the dirt, because on my island right now I'm already starting to get some lag in certain places, so having open ground without decorations or code can actually help combat the lag on an island. And I wanted to challenge myself since my instinct is to cover every single tile. So for this area, I'm layering an iron frame, a damaged mini car, a few oil barrels, and I also threw in a can of spray paint to tie it in with the graffiti from the bridge. And throughout my building process, I like to check the areas I've decorated from the lookout point, since that's the main point of view that I'm trying to decorate around. And then moving over to our brick building, I wanted this area to look like a delivery truck that was in the middle of a drop-off when the apocalypse happened, so all of these items that were unloaded are just sitting around now. I also just like layering the different cardboard items, so this gave me an excuse to actually use them in this build. I kind of pop between areas during this build, but now I'm moving over to the small area between our two buildings and I'm just layering a mini car with a couple of pirate barrels. I love that they gave us a sideways laying pirate barrel, but I do wish it was customizable to look like the normal wooden barrels, because there are times I want to use the normal barrels because of the brown color, but they don't have a matching sideways barrel, so I'm kind of stuck either just using the normal upright one, or I have to change over to the darker pirate barrel, and that's not always the vibe I'm going for. But let me know in the comments if you prefer the pirate barrels or the normal wooden barrels. I went back through near the pathway and threw down some of the flowers, and now I'm just going through and adding some of our smaller trees. There isn't really a reason for where I place these trees, I kind of just wing it, and I'll try them in different spots, and sometimes they don't work out and I just end up moving them to a new spot. I just try to go with the flow of the area with keeping the smaller trees more towards the center and the bigger trees on the outskirts so they don't block the view. And that's especially important with these overlook builds because you don't want to have this great view and then just a giant tree blocking the area that you spent a lot of time building. Once most of our smaller trees are placed, I'm going in and starting to add some of our larger or fully grown trees along the sides of our main view, and I'm keeping these to the perimeter and kind of tucking them between the buildings as well. And if you can't tell, I'm trying to spread out the trees and the shrubs to make sure this area isn't too dense, because I'm trying to keep the overgrown field feeling without it turning into too much of a forest. And I know I said earlier that I didn't want to cover this whole area in codes, but under a few of the items we do have placed, I want to detail those areas up a little bit more by adding some patches of dirt or some of the rocks and leaves to make it feel a little bit more full. You also might have noticed that there are a few of the in-game rocks in this area, and I'm trying to keep those in here because it gives a nice natural feeling to the area. But I will say they are a little annoying to decorate around because you can't move them and you can't plant a tree right next to them. But on this side of the build, I'm adding a small wooded area to block off the beaches because you know I don't like to decorate them. Plus, I will be leaving some of the in-game buildings on the beach because they don't match the vibe of the island, so I'm just hiding them on the beaches that you can't access. And I was starting to feel like this build was getting a little too heavy on the right side and there wasn't a whole lot going on the left side, so I decided to add this little building over here. This is a really simple building that I have made on this island before. It's just 3 storefronts with a little piece of fencing on the back wall of the cliff, and then for this building I wanted there to look like there was a sign, so I added the light up display to the front. It's a small building, but I think it helps even out the build a little bit more. This top left corner was looking a little empty, so I'm layering a few different trash items just to detail up this corner. And I've actually been waiting to use the sloppy couch. I actually meant to use it in the junkyard build but completely forgot, so I'm glad I was able to fit it in this area. Next to our new small building, I'm adding a few trees and shrubs to the perimeter of the building, and then we'll be going in and adding a few smaller decorative items to make it look more abandoned and run down. Like I mentioned earlier, this side of the build will be a little woodsy spot to block off the beach, so I'm going through and adding some of our larger stunted trees mixed in with some fully grown trees. Now throughout the trees we just placed, I'm densifying up this area by placing some flowers and shrubs, and I'll also be adding some other natural items like the vine bench and different types of rocks or stone items. If you've seen my mushroom forest build on this island, you know that I use this tree root coat to look like the cordyceps from the show The Last of Us. So I wanted to tie that build into this build a little bit, so I'm adding the root coat with a strange mushroom parasol in this little corner. And my plan is to have a few mushrooms spread throughout the whole island, so it looks like the mushroom from that build is spreading throughout the island. Then I'm turning my attention to this small little spot in the bottom left corner of the map, and I thought this would be a good spot for a little sitting area. So I'm just adding an iron bench mixed with a few smaller natural items and some flowers and shrubs. And I'm just continuing to densen up the left side of this build by sprinkling in some flowers, shrubs, and weeds. I am still making a conscious effort to not over densen because I do want to keep some openness even in the woodsy portion of this build. Then I'm just going to continue decorating this front section of this build, and it's a pretty small area with some sections only being 2 tiles wide, so a majority of this section is going to be decorated with stunted trees, flowers, shrubs, weeds, and a few custom codes. Decorating these small areas can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, but I'm trying to keep it very simple since most of this area you won't really be able to see anyway since it's going to be behind the buildings. Now I'm just making some final touches by throwing down some more weeds, custom codes, and a few items that you can walk over. And here's the final build. And that's the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching. Before you leave, make sure to give the video a like, comment, and to subscribe to the channel. If you watched to the end of the video, let me know if you've ever been urban exploring and visited some cool abandoned buildings before. Bye, friends!